Russian tanks roll into Ukraine. The target? The capital, Kiev. Ukraine's president says the response from the West is not good enough. So, what are the options? Can Ukraine defend itself? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is intensifying with air and ground assaults. Russian troops have taken several towns and cities and also the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site. Now they're attacking the capital, Kiev. Explosions and gunfire have forced hundreds of thousands of people to escape to subway stations and makeshift bomb shelters. Russian tanks have arrived over the border from Belarus. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is targeting civilian areas. He is calling for stronger sanctions against Moscow, adding his country is being forced to fight alone.
When bombs fall on Kiev, it happens in Europe, not just in Ukraine. When missiles kill our people, it's the death of Europeans. I demand greater security for Europe, greater protection for Ukraine as part of a democratic world.
The U.S., Australia, and Japan are among those countries who have now imposed more sanctions against Russia. European Union leaders agreed to target Russia's financial system, state-owned companies, and business people, but the measures stopped short of blocking Russia from the SWIFT global payment system. The Kremlin promised retaliatory sanctions. Russia's foreign minister says Moscow will only hold talks with Kiev when Ukraine's army surrenders. Sergei Lavrov accused Ukraine's president of being insincere.
He is simply lying to you when he says he's ready to discuss Ukraine's neutral status. We suggested all sorts of options and President Putin discussed it with Macron, and he said it directly: the expansion of NATO is unacceptable. We wanted to seek further security options which would be guaranteeing demands for Ukraine, European nations, and Russia. But our demands on security guarantees have not been met.
All right, let's introduce our panel. In Kiev, Halyna Yanchenko. She's a member of the Ukrainian parliament. In Moscow, Dmitry Bridzhe, a Russian political analyst. And in London, Andreas Krieg. He's an assistant professor at the Defense Studies Department at King's College London. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us today on Inside Story. Halyna, let me start with you today. President Zelensky has said that the response from the West is not good enough. He is urging Europe to act more quickly in imposing sanctions on Moscow. He says that the West has been too slow to respond. What do Ukrainians want to see right now? What do they want to see immediately from the West?
Well, I should tell you that actually we in Ukraine are shocked because of the situation, because Putin was lying to Ukraine and to the whole world. He and his close associates, his speaker, his minister of foreign affairs, said that they will not attack Ukraine. They will not invade Ukraine. And for the second day in a row, the whole world sees it was a lie. Yesterday, I woke up in Kyiv, and I am in Kyiv at my home. I woke up at 5 a.m. because of explosions in Kyiv. The situation is horrible. They are attacking both military objects, but also civilian objects. Today, Russians were attacking a city called Akhtirka with a hurricane volley fire system. They bombed kindergarten, and some children died. Civilian children and some adults died because of Russian weapon. So what do we expect world? Two things are urgent and should be implemented immediately. Number one is block Russia from SWIFT. Until Putin is in SWIFT system, he can continue funding this war against Ukraine in European country. Second urgent thing is no-fly zone above Ukraine, because Russians are using their aviation, they're using their rockets and their volley fire system to bomb Ukrainian cities all over the country, all regions. And people in Ukraine are horrified. A lot of civilians were murdered yesterday and today because of Russian military and Russian arms. So two things: block Russia from SWIFT system immediately, so they can't continue funding the war. And second thing is no-fly zone above Ukraine.
Andreas, you heard Halyna there say that a no-fly zone is needed immediately. Do you think that's something that could eventually become a possibility? And also, I'm curious about your perspective about if you believe that Ukraine is able to defend itself right now.
Yeah, great. Obviously, this is a major act of aggression by Russia that the Western world and the international community very firmly stand behind the Ukraine. But there is also, on the other hand, there is this idea of feasibility. How much are we willing to support? And we are supporting the Ukraine without getting dragged directly into a military confrontation with Russia. And that's, I think, where the deterrence of the West has kind of failed. But I do believe that there needs to be a full spectrum response to what Russia is doing, because Russia is using all domains, all levers of power to advance its interest in Ukraine, not just the military one. So I fully agree. I mean, the SWIFT response is a very important one. And I hope that, especially Germany could really rally around that idea. But from a military point of view, a no-fly zone is certainly a very, very important factor here, because I think the air superiority of Russia at this point is probably the most important competitive advantage that Russia has, operational advantage as well over the Ukrainian armed forces. So what the West has delivered so far, which are anti-aircraft missiles, has been already fairly effective. A lot of aircraft, rotary aircraft as well as fixed-wing aircraft, have been shot down so far, but it's not enough. Air defense systems need to be obviously bolstered. The resilience of the air defense in Ukraine has to be increased. The problem with that is that the systems that could be delivered to Ukraine don't just need to be shifted into the Ukraine, but there needs to be a training element to it as well, which at this point in time, as the war has already started, is very, very difficult. A no-fly zone itself certainly would address that issue, but would come with immense risk for the West, because it would mean that you would have to enforce it coercively against the Russian Air Force, where things happening at rapid speed with a huge, huge risk, I think, for NATO forces to get dragged into a kind of Article 5 a kind of moment or territory where, NATO planes would have to fight Russian planes. There's a lot of leeway and a lot of room for mistakes, particularly as things happen very, very, very quickly. And NATO could be very quickly in a space where it would have to fight Russia and have to reply to aggression or reply actively against Russian aggression against its own forces. That is something that at this point NATO is a risk that NATO is not willing to take.
Dmitry, this is all moving very fast right now. Do you believe that we will get to the point where NATO is forced to step in?
I don't think so right now, because it could be dangerous for NATO and for European countries, because right now, if NATO will support Ukraine, other European countries will be part of that war. And also some members of NATO, they don't want to have this war with Russia, like Turkey and other countries, some other European countries. So it's obvious, right now, that NATO only can support Ukraine by giving them weapons to defend themselves from the Russian invasion. But it's obvious that it won't help them in this situation, because right now, as I hear from news from different, the news said that Russian army is not far from the Ukrainian capital city, Kiev. So it's obvious that Putin he was trying to take control over Kiev and change the government there, and to put another government or president that will support Russian agenda in this region. And that's on other option that I see Putin is giving for Ukraine is not to be part of European Union and NATO. That's what's doing Putin right now.
Halyna, the Kremlin is saying that Russia is ready to send a delegation to Belarus for talks with Ukrainian officials. From your vantage point, is the door to diplomacy open in any way right now, or has it shut completely?
The door of diplomacy is shut, but we can open it. In order to open it, Putin should stop killing Ukrainians and stop continue invasions to Ukraine, because we have dozens of Russian tanks on the territory that invaded territory of Ukraine yesterday. We have hundreds, thousands of Russian soldiers and military units on the territory of Ukraine. So they should stop killing Ukrainian civilians in order to start a negotiation. However, I should tell that negotiation means communication from two sides and not ultimatum of one side. What Russia wants as of now, they want a couple things from Ukraine. And these things are really unacceptable in my opinion. They want us to give them part of our sovereign territory, including Donetsk and Lugansk region, the whole region, not only the temporary occupied territories. They want us to delete our army and give away all our arms and weapons. So like total demilitarization of the whole country. They want some other things that actually will make us very vulnerable, because we will not be able to protect ourselves. And already in 1994, if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine already believed Russia when we signed Bucharest Memorandum and we gave away our nuclear weapon to Russia. And in return to that, three countries, Russia, Great Britain, and USA, promised that they will protect our borders. If that's the way Russia protect our borders, then I'm sorry. These memorandums are not working, and our country is not protected. But we gave away our nuclear power. So negotiations is two-side communication, not ultimatum from Russia side only.
Dmitry, what do you say? Does this just continue to devolve into a long-term, full-blown conflict, or is there any room here now for diplomacy going forward? And also, what is President Putin's ultimate goal here?
It's obvious that Putin now the plan or what will happen is the hands of Putin. He will it's your option, either to stop the war, either to go to something to diplomacy. So it's obvious now. It's obvious that Putin wants to try to take control over Kiev. He wants to change the government. He wants a government that will support him. And as we know, he did the same thing in Belarus when he supported Alexander Lukashenko against the protests, against the opposition. And it's obvious that he's doing the same thing in Ukraine, but with other power, with other political power, and he's trying to now he's saying inside Russia that he's helping Russians in Ukraine, that he's fighting against Nazis or whatever. So it's obvious now that Putin's plan is to change the government there, to put a government that will support his agenda or plans for Europe. And he also he's planning to he see Ukrainian plan to join European Union and NATO is dangerous for him, because as we saw, the same thing happened in Belarus, in Kazakhstan. He supported a government that will support him and will support Russian agenda in the world.
Andreas, if this were to become a long-term occupation, would President Putin and Russian forces be able to sustain, these long-term intensive fighting in Ukraine?
No, absolutely not. I do firmly believe that this is a timely, planned as a very short term. He calls it a special military operation, limited in scope, limited in time. I think it is about decapitation. I agree with the previous speaker. It's about kind of bringing about regime change in Kiev. But that has to kind of happen fairly quickly. I think if Russia now gets bogged down in a stalemate type of operation, because we shouldn't make the mistake, as some analysts have done over the last couple of days, to compare the situation in Ukraine with that in Syria, where the Russians were firmly successful. It's quite a major war. The Ukrainians are very, very well trained. They're well equipped, and most importantly, they have quite a lot of resolve to fight back what they see as an aggressor. There is no, this is not a divided country where there's 50% pro and 50% against Russia. The country very firmly stands against Russia and in support of the Kiev government. So the environment is very ripe for an insurgency anyway. So Russia cannot have an interest in being dragged down in a quagmire of a prolonged conflict and trying to control particularly, local communities, because I think already we see local communities taking up arms and fighting for their country. And then think this is something also, there are an opportunity there for Western countries, and we've seen this today when the UK Defence Minister already made a reference to potential surrogate operations, giving support to Ukrainians, even in territories that have already been seized by the Russians. I think there are opportunities to kind of mobilize local, very resolved, mobilized a firm resistance against Russian occupation, if it ever came to an occupation. But, there is also something, this war is very, very unpopular in Russia. And I think as this drags on and body bags will mount, and, Putin has a huge risk here. I think he's taken a huge risk here in potentially losing his own street at home, potentially not being able to seize objectives very firmly. And a protracted conflict is not something that he will or want to sustain. In previous periods, Russia has always delegated these sort of wars, as in Syria, to local surrogates, to mercenaries. And this is not something he can do in Ukraine because he's up against a very, very robust opposition. The most important thing is, though, that the Ukrainian forces now retain a level of resilience where the government retains a certain degree of resilience to actually fight back and not critically failing, because that is something over time is working for the Ukraine and time is working against Russia. So the longer this takes, I think the more difficult it will become for Putin to achieve objectives.
Dmitry, Andreas was just saying that he believes that this conflict is an unpopular one in Russia among the population. The fact that there have been protests scattered across Russia, does that worry President Putin at all? Is there a sense that he is misjudging the mood of the Russian people, and could that be to his detriment?
We have in Russia two categories of people. One part of people that's all from the Soviet Union generation to support Putin's plan or Putin's war in Ukraine, the Putin's invasion in Ukraine. Another part, the young generation, they don't support. We saw how people they were protesting against the war. They don't want to have a war with a country that they have relatives with, they have families living there. So it's obvious now we have in Russia two categories of people, and it's obvious that Putin was doing that for elections. In 2024 we have presidential elections. He wants to get more popular because now his popularity is getting low. He's not popular as it was in the past, and he had problem with the position. But now he has the full control of country. He can do whatever he wants. He can do a war. He can create a big war, or he can end this war. So it's obvious now in Russia, if the war won't end, only people of Russia, on the citizens of Russia, they can stop Putin and stop this war. But it's obvious that people, they're scared to get on streets to speak freely, because they're the problem. They have many people arrested, and it's obvious that government they won't listen to them.
Halyna, earlier in the show, you said that from your perspective that what's needed right now is a no-fly zone, and you said also that Russia basically needs to be shut out of the SWIFT global payment system. If that fails to happen, if those two things fail to happen, and in the event that Western allies don't step in any further, how else is Ukraine going to be able to defend itself against Russia?
Well, I should tell that we already defend ourselves for yesterday and for today, it's basically Ukrainian army only, and a lot of civilian men and women are coming to territorial point of territorial defense to get some weapon and to defend their cities and their communities. But if West continue, being deeply concerned without no concrete action, then they should know that not only the blood of murdered civilian Ukrainians will be on their hands, but also some potentially horrible ecological catastrophe. One thing that not many people are talking about is that yesterday Russian troops captured Chernobyl zone. It's the biggest Ukrainian nuclear plant, and also the biggest nuclear plant in Europe, which already exploded in 1986. They mess around with Chernobyl with a weapon, with their fire system, and they actually might use Chernobyl as a further platform to invade to Kyiv. So if they disturb this nuclear plant, or do something to sarcophag that protects the exploded part of the plant, the ecological catastrophe will be not only in Ukraine, but it will be the hugest ecological catastrophe of this century in the world. And then the whole world should react to save their people from ecological catastrophe.
Andreas, from your
that is why close no-fly zone is an immediate thing, because Russians, they keep sending their rockets and their aviation to all regions of Ukraine, including Kyiv Oblast, where Chernobyl nuclear plant and Sarcophago is.
Andreas, from your perspective, just how dangerous a moment do we find ourselves in right now? And do you believe there is potential that this conflict could spread to a NATO country going forward?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, what I disagree with generally in the discourse over the last couple of months has been that people are talking about a potential war in Ukraine, a potential invasion coming into Ukraine. This war has been going on for at least since 2014, and for the Russians, it's a war that's been going on since the early 90s. So we're already seeing aggression by Russia, outside of Ukraine into NATO territory. It's just we've now seen an escalation of that sort of warfare in Ukraine with a combined arms approach. But, this is an ongoing conflict that for Russia is all kind of connected to other what they call buffer zones in between NATO and Russia, and most importantly, the Baltic states. So we should be under no illusion that any decision that the West is making, any kind of projection of power that NATO is making, any decision that NATO is making at this point in time will eventually determine how far Russia is going when it comes to actually threatening NATO territory, as they're already doing at the moment. So the resilience and also the resolve that NATO has to show now has to be very, very firm. We can't have certain countries opting out, and I think Germany has been one of the countries that has been mostly opting out of a joint European or joint NATO decision against how to clamp down on Russia. I think Britain is taking kind of a lead here in Europe and taking a very firm position when it comes to supporting Ukraine and also doing more. This is a very dangerous moment, but it's also a defining moment, I think, for the next decades to determine the relationship and also the boundaries between Western sphere of influence, NATO sphere of influence, and Russian sphere of influence.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the discussion there. Thank you so much to our guests, Halyna Yanchenko, Dmitry Bridzhe, and Andreas Krieg. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.